I'm Adrian, I'm from La Trobe University. That would be the intro I would usually give. Just before I start though, I just want to acknowledge the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nations, the owners of the land that we're presenting and meeting on today. My presentation today will sort of have two main parts. The first part is kind of a research-based presentation about a project we've recently done about hepatitis C treatment uptake in Australia and experiences of treatment and cure. And then the second part of the presentation is about a new resource we've made stemming from that research called Vital Voices on hepc.org, which is a kind of a resource about experiences of hepatitis C treatment. Before I get on with it, I'd just also like to mention the contributions from the 50 people who generously shared their stories with us for this research, the funding, the broader investigator team, which you can see up on the slide, and that, this project operated with the guidance from an expert advisory panel, which included representatives from a range of stakeholders, relevant stakeholders. So we started this project in 2020, which, as we know, was for about 4 years after the availability of direct-acting antiviral treatments, which essentially revolutionized hepatitis C treatment. So much so that kind of a world without hepatitis C became imaginable during this period, and the World Health Organization had this goal of eliminating Hep C by 2030, and Australia was one of the signatories of that goal. We know as well that hepatitis C treatment uptake was really good for a few years, and then it plateaued and somewhat declined. Of course, COVID-19 can be relevant here, but there's also other issues as well. So it's sort of in this period that we started to investigate experiences of hepatitis C, looking at this this plateauing uptake and sort of looking at some of the social dynamics that shape that. And we sort of started from the position that not enough is known about hepatitis C treatment experiences in this new age in which elimination sort of seems possible. So today I'm going to analyze personal experiences of stigma in this period and how they're shaping treatment uptake for individuals affected by Hep C. So the broader project had 5 key aims, but I'm only going to speak to 2 today, which is to identify impediments to uptake, in this case, hepatitis C, and the 5th aim, which was to use the new knowledge generated by the research to develop a health resource for consumers and health professionals working in this area. So of course, we've known for a long time that stigma is a significant part of the lives of people living with Hep C. And I don't think it's worth sort of reviewing this extensive body of literature here, but suffice to say that this is, this is a contemporary issue. It remains an issue even within this new treatment period. So Australian research, for example, suggests that stigmatizing dynamics such as a struggle to find non-judgmental healthcare are contemporary barriers to treatment. And it's within this context that we sort of conducted this research. Now, I don't want to labor this too much, but I think it's worth just setting out a little bit about how we're approaching stigma in this research, or how I'm sort of approaching it today. And so I don't think it's controversial to say that the stigmatization of hepatitis C is intimately linked with the stigmatization of injecting drug consumption. So, this has been sort of argued for a long time, and we know that this relationship, in the words of Fraser and Sear, creates a powerful net of meanings that help shape understandings of the disease and of prevention and treatment options. And I think the key thing is that this net of meanings permeates everyday life for people affected by Hep C. So it's, while I might, or other research might focus on a specific issue, such as treatment that I'm doing today, or specific settings such as clinics or workplaces, stigma isn't easily reduced to a certain location or part of life, and it can kind of weave its way into the fabric of everyday life. So it creates not individual islands of discomfort, but part of the fabric of daily life. So I think that, the reason I kind of mention this is that in looking at stigma, a lot of research might focus purely on very negative or overtly discriminatory encounters. And there's a lot of research on that, and a lot of really important research has been done in that space. But I think an equally important thing to do is to look at the ways that stigma shapes. It can shape things in a more subtle way. It doesn't have to just be really explicitly discriminatory. And stigma has effects even where decisions are made to avoid stigma or outside of obvious encounters. It's like stigma has a range of effects shaping decisions even before it's actually like occurred or encountered in an obvious sense. Just a note on who we spoke to and who appears in the website that I'll be talking about a little bit as well. So there's 50 people, roughly half in Victoria and half in New South Wales. They had a range of experiences of hepatitis C and treatment. So some had only the new DAA treatment, some had only had the old treatment, some had both, some had Hep C without any treatment experience, people who had reacquired it after a period of cure, people who were unsure of their Hep C status, but saw Hep C something relevant to them. So, people, for example, who were injecting drugs, as well as some other key populations, for example, people who acquired Hep C through medical procedures or acquired Hep C prior to moving to Australia. I do want to mention that the data set includes the perspectives of 5 Aboriginal people and 11 people from non-Australian cultural backgrounds, 9 who identify as LGBTIQ, 25 who lived in inner metro areas, 15 in outer metro, and 10 regionally. And I think it's important to mention that ideally we would have recruited and interviewed more people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds and more people who had acquired hepatitis C before arriving to Australia. But the obvious thing is, as research was conducted during COVID-19, it was quite difficult to be able to recruit people and interview them and stuff during this period. And I don't need to go into why that is, given everyone here is from Victoria. So yeah, that's a note that's sort of like who we've spoken to, and that's the background of the research. And so now I kind of want to move into the sort of 3 key themes and the 3 key kind of like stigma dynamics that I'll cover today. And so the first is treatment hesitancy. So even in a period in which we have this fantastic treatment, which is, like night and day compared to the old interferon treatment, people still were hesitant at times or discussed being hesitant about taking treatment, and negative attitudes were part of this. So Julia is an example. So she lived with Hep C for 11 years, and at the time of her treatment, she worked in a community health service that actually provided hepatitis C treatment. So she said, there was nothing, in the work policy stopping me accessing the treatment through my workplace, but I wasn't comfortable with that. So I inquired about being able to access the treatment in New South Wales instead. So she was working in Victoria at the time. And I booked in with our local dodgy bulk bill GP because it's really easy just to go to them and tell them what you want without asking any extra questions. And I've been using these people for years. So while she does access treatment in 2017, Julia focuses on a range of stigma effects that shape her decision. And in many ways, her experience could have been the most straightforward one, and that it was quite immediately available to her. But she felt uncomfortable with that. And instead, she goes into state to access treatment. Another example comes from Mem. So she had hepatitis C for 13 years, and she was cured of it in 2019. But I use her example as a way of pointing to, even with cure, her sort of experience of stigma shapes her ongoing engagement with healthcare. So she says she kind of needs to be doing these checkups and monitoring of her liver health. But she says, I have it in the back of the mind that I need to step up and take these extra tests that need to be done. And even though I find it confronting and go get the tests done, I have to go and get other bloods done. But as she was explaining here, she actually hadn't done that yet. So, despite cure, stigma continues to constitute healthcare settings as unwelcoming environments for men and contributes to this hesitancy to get further healthcare. So the next stigma effect I want to look at is communication. And so this is a sort of a broader theme that isn't just about healthcare settings, it's about communication within a whole variety of parts of life. So people often spoke about their ability and desire to speak with others about hepatitis C. And these issues impacted their encounters with health professionals as well as their broader social relationships, as I've said. So Amelia offers an example of this. Amelia was living a very complex, she's explaining a very complex situation here. So she says, she had experience in family violence, and then she had to leave the home. And then she's renting. And then, as she says, I ended up like homeless, and then ended up living on a stranger's couch, a friend of a friend, and living there a little bit, and then moving from there. So it's been a craziest couple of years. You're not really wanting certain people to know about your treatment because they'll judge you. So then you kind of hide your medication, and then you're not taking it anymore, and then you're taking it whenever. So it was extremely hard, and then you sort of stop altogether. And so I kind of mentioned, I think that it's an important account here because one of the things we often focus on the ease of the new treatment. It's just a daily tablet, which is a fair thing to say. It is just a daily tablet, but for someone who's living in a very complex and at times very precarious or delicate situation, a daily tablet isn't so simple as that. In this case, and I'll mention it a little bit more later on, but stigma is only one of the things happening here, obviously, but it's part of why she had to hide, or she felt she had to hide her medication. Steve's another example. So Steve had Hep C for 12 years, and he spoke about how the stigma associated with injecting drug consumption reduced his communication with other people, especially his family, which is what he's focusing on here. So he says, I don't speak about it with other people because he's too embarrassed. And he goes, I just made sure I had my shaving equipment in my room with me and toothbrush and so forth. It goes back to me using drugs, really. As soon as you tell someone you've had Hep C, even if they don't know anything about it, they know that you're a user. So as I mentioned, of course, stigma was only one of the things happening here, with other concerns such as homelessness, childcare, responsibilities, intimate partner violence, and so on, all impacting treatment experiences and communication. But given my focus on stigma, I'm just kind of emphasizing that as one of the factors, one of the forces that's happening here, and its impact on communication and disclosure. So therefore also on the ability to have a support network and people to talk to about your, things going on in your life. So the third part of the stigma dynamic that I want to look at is returns us back to healthcare specifically. So it's sort of uninformative healthcare encounters. So I think it's important to mention that many of our participants had very positive experience with healthcare professionals, especially more recently. But that doesn't mean that stigma didn't remain a contemporary issue, or that previous experiences of stigma didn't continue to feed and shape relationships and encounters, even with health professionals that they were having a positive experience with. So Peter, for example, so she was regularly injecting drugs at the time of her interview, but she was unsure of her hepatitis C status. She says, I don't bring up the subject of my injecting anymore with my GP, and my GP doesn't bring it up. And I think she thinks that I've stopped. So unless something comes up to that, medically, that could be affected by my injecting, I don't think she'll bring it up. I do know that there have been changes to Hep C treatment, but I don't know what they are, if you know what I mean. I don't know anything about it. And Sam points to a different dynamic, but one that I think is equally important. So he had treatment the same year of his diagnosis in 2018. So he wasn't hesitant about his treatment. But he describes the way that efforts by a very conscientious GP to address stigma inadvertently reduced the kinds of information about treatment he would like to access. So he explained that he perceived his GP, and this was his words, to be pretty blasé about the diagnosis and primarily focused on how easy it is to be cured and that there was no reason to be getting upset. So he says, my doctor was very relaxed about it, because he didn't want me to feel bad about myself. You know what I mean? He didn't want me to have the stigma. He didn't want me to feel bad about it. He didn't want me to feel dirty about it. He was really relaxed. But in saying that, he didn't explain to me what the effects are going to be down the line. So like if he was a bit more in depth and telling me about how it was going to affect me and how it's going to affect my everyday life, that would have helped more. So in thinking about Peter and Sam's experiences together, I think that, a focus on stigma doesn't necessarily result in this focus on just negative experiences or discrimination, but analysing how it operates as a broader process as part of everyday life. And most importantly, in this case, a process that reduces the effectiveness of healthcare appointments even in contexts in which efforts to explicitly address it are being made. And I think that's an important point here. So for Sam, in some ways, he appreciates the effort that his GP has gone to. But I think that's, there is, he would have liked, there to be more in depth, which is just an inadvertent effect of this kind of complex dynamic that both parties are negotiating here. So just wrapping up this part of the presentation, these accounts suggest that even in a context shaped by these great new treatments, stigma continues to shape uptake and experiences of treatment, including for people who are cured of it. And I think it suggests that where stigma shapes part of the everyday life of people with Hep C, our goal for elimination and our elimination agenda may need to be broadened as well. So in this sense, an elimination project towards hepatitis C may need to think, alongside things like treatment and cure and institutional healthcare arrangements. We also might need to think about addressing other issues such as the social position of people living with Hep C, including the moral economies and social distinctions that about lives worth living that often register those affected by Hep C as somehow intrinsically deficient. So moving on to the second part of the presentation, this kind of broad elimination project would obviously be really ambitious and wouldn't just focus on Hep C specifically, but also think about things like housing access, prohibition of certain drugs, and a range of other issues that might come to mind when we're thinking about the things that are affecting the participants in this research. Now, these kinds of really broad concerns are beyond, what I can talk about today. But we've made this new resource that we hope as sort of one contribution to trying to address the social position of people living with Hep C. And it's a website called Vital Voices on hepc.org. And so what we've done is collected 50 stories from the 50 people that we interviewed, and we've written them up and put them on this website for people to have a look at. And the idea behind this is to present the stories of these people within their whole lives, emphasizing that decisions about Hep C and treatment make sense within the context of each individual, and that they share many of the same responsibilities, concerns, and challenges of the other members of the community. So the idea is that this is supposed to be a destigmatizing intervention in kind of social and popular understandings of hepatitis C and the lives of people who are affected by it. And I think I'd just like to show you some clips from the website today. Do you want to help me again? Stories, as I've mentioned, as well as a series of topic sections that address a sort of specific issue. And what the website has is reenacted video clips from what people told us in the interviews. So they're actual quotes of what people said. It also has clips of the original audio of the interview. So some people were happy for us to use their actual voice. And so visitors to the website can actually hear the voice of people living with Hep C and what they have to say. And some people didn't consent, or the recording quality wasn't good, so they just appear in text. And that's also a way of just making it more accessible. So I thought I'd show you, sort of start from the beginning in terms of giving you a taste of the website. So this is a section here on experiences of diagnosis. And I thought, so this is, a collection of what people have to say about when they were diagnosed with Hep C. And I thought we could hear from Lou today and what she has to say. So this is Lou's.
So I had started a new relationship and we thought, oh, we should do the right thing and get an STD check. And so I got one, and that was the first time I'd had one, and that was the results. So that was quite a shock. Hepatitis C just wasn't even in my kind of orbit, really. I remember back when I was 18, and I see a cardiologist every year because I had heart surgery when I was a baby, and it was from the blood transfusion at hospital. So that's how it was acquired as a baby in 1980. And I remember saying to my cardiologist when I turned 18, I said, oh, could I have got AIDS? Because I remember there was a lot of information, people getting HIV in the 80s from blood transfusions. And he just sort of laughed me off and said, no, of course you don't have AIDS. Like, you know, made me feel a bit silly. So then I just never really even thought about it again. Yeah, so it did come as a complete shock.
That's Lou. And I mean, I like her story. It kind of emphasizes the way that dominant notions of Hep C is purely related to injecting drug use can kind of postpone testing and like the relevance of Hep C for other people, as well as kind of the importance of taking concerns, you know, seriously, even when they might seem unlikely, like, you know, her reflection on HIV there. But maybe we'll also listen to Gracie, who's just sort of reflecting on life, on living life with hepatitis C. And I mean, while this scrolling is slightly annoying, I hope it emphasizes how many stories there are on the website for you. Just Gracie. Here we are. So this is her actual.
Yeah, I just told everyone I've got Hep C and don't get my blood on your blood. So if you're bleeding, put a Band-Aid on. If I'm bleeding, or if you notice I'm bleeding, because sometimes I don't notice, tell me. And we've got the alcohol swabs there and the Band-Aids in the classroom. And I just made them all aware that it was an issue. It's just easier if you're honest, you know, rather than hiding stuff and being ashamed. It's just come straight out and say, I got it sharing needles, bad luck, deal with it.
Like Gracie, because, you know, I was thinking about all the stuff about communication and disclosure. In some ways, she sort of complicates that story. She was very forthright about her experiences and very, as she's explained, very willing to tell people not just about her Hep C, but how she came to acquire it as well. How am I going for time? Okay, cool. Maybe I'll just show 2 more clips and then wrap it up. Cool. So I'll show you Julia. So this section's about treatment decisions, and it really focuses on the way that different people, you know, their decisions are shaped often by their other responsibilities in their life, not just an individual concern. And here's Julia, she's played by an actor.
Even those maternal child healthcare books you get, you know, the blue ones that chart their first 5 years of life. I had one for my daughter, you know, and the first page of that just talks about my drug dependence in pregnancy and my Hep C status. So even her first health document, you know, has my stigmatized health history on it. It's awful. It also meant that at every kind of healthcare appointment, my drug history was, you know, going to be brought up, was going to be made relevant when it wasn't necessarily relevant. And yeah, just the stigma that comes with that as a single mum, as someone who is trying to manage, you know, all the trauma or all the things that led to the drug dependence as well. So yeah, I guess, you know, the Hep C was something that I couldn't avoid in healthcare. It was the reminder that I had this history of drug dependence.
I think Julia's reflections there are quite powerful for a number of reasons, but one of the important things I think from her sort of story is the way that hepatitis C comes to kind of overly define all of her health experiences, even when it's not even relevant, you know, talking about her daughter's experiences, that kind of thing, constantly brought up for her, when it was actually very much something very much in the past, sort of chronologically, but not in terms of how she thinks about herself and her experiences. And just one more clip before I finish up. There's a whole section on the site which I think could be quite useful for people, which is just perspectives and experiences of the new treatment. And so I think if anyone was interested in getting the treatment or thinking about it, they could have a look here and hear what people have to say about it.
It was just a bottle of tablets that was sitting next to my vitamins, which I had every morning. I took them at 7. Every night I took them at 7, so quite easy. I have friends who still have hepatitis C. I try and encourage them to get treatment. Good Hep C treatment should be available to everybody, whether they're using drugs or not. Should be freely available to everybody.
Show that kind of short clip there because Dave's experience and very positive sort of account of the new treatment reflects most of the experiences, not all, but most of the experiences that we heard in the course of this research. Oopsie. I'll just go back to the slide. It's my final slide. Yeah, so just to conclude, I hope that these sort of clips have given you an idea of what's available on the vitalvoices.org. And of course, given that we interviewed 50 people and all 50 people's stories are on the site, I could only give you a bit of a sample today. But just to finish up, I thought I'd mention a couple of potential uses of the site. And one is, I think it has potential to be used in sort of professional development and training. And that's a particular one that we're particularly interested in as a team. And we imagine that some of the topic pages, for example, could be used as training resources. So, for example, the content on experiences of diagnosis and testing could be used to inform practices around delivering diagnosis or offering testing. The content on perspectives on the new treatment might be useful for consumers who are thinking about having treatment or would like some experience, some information on lived experiences of it, but don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking to other people about it. We also think some of the detailed personal stories on the site could be used in stigma prevention initiatives, as they really emphasize the importance of approaching people affected by Hep C as whole people whose decisions and beliefs about treatment really make sense within the broader range of responsibilities and concerns they have. And just overall, I'd like to invite everyone to have a look at the website when you get a moment, because we really hope it can be a destigmatizing public resource that interrupts marginalizing understandings of people with Hep C. Thanks.
Would anyone care to ask any questions?
So I was just going to say, I just wonder sometimes whether the COVID experience, both on a personal level and a community level, whether that's helped people understand, because, there were times when people, if they were isolating, were like lepers. And I just wonder if that's made people more aware of how the stigma can really affect people on a personal level and on a community level as well, how that can affect, have an impact on people's health, general health, not just their physical health, but their mental health, their emotional health as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important issue. I think it brings up a number of things. I mean, some of the people we interviewed actually reflected on the experience of COVID specifically, and they sort of said, well, now we've got this experience where, the general, almost everyone feels that they can be like a risk to others and they feel infectious and that kind of thing. And that was a part of the real kind of discriminatory experiences of people with bloodborne viruses going all the way back to HIV, but, hepatitis C as well. And they kind of reflected on that a lot themselves. I mean, I think it's like a really important question, and it kind of remains to be seen what kind of long-term effect it'll have on like our attitudes to those kinds of health issues. It's interesting that there is a bit of some very recent research which includes people affected by Hep C, who were sort of, some of them were sort of saying, and it's not sort of intrinsically about Hep C, it's about their life more generally, but sort of saying that they found adjusting to some of the COVID-19 restrictions not as difficult because of the nature of the lives that they were living at the time anyway, with, you know, having you know, limited community connections and a range of other ways. And that's the, you know, that says broader things about the effect of marginalization and how it intersects with something like COVID-19. Yeah, but it's definitely a really interesting kind of issue. Yeah.
Have you ever come across people that self-stigmatize? So people who think, for example, on the top of my head, people that think that they're not good enough for taking, like going on treatment or seeking care. And have you ever come across that in your research, or what are the implications for, you know, future cares, things like that?
Yeah, it's a really pretty common issue, and including people in this research. One example that immediately comes to mind is a couple of people noticed, either they, I don't know how they came across it exactly, but they noticed how much hepatitis C treatment costs, like the government, like unsubsidized, or you know, how much it would cost before subsidization, and they sort of reflected, oh, it's so much money, and it's like, is it really worth it for us to be doing, you know, costing all this money to do this? And of course, I mean, I think the answer is yes, and you know, I think most people would agree, or in this room. But I think it's, you know, that's an effect of stigma. I think, you know, like reflecting on, you know, is my health even worth, you know, putting this dollar value on it. I think that yeah, it shapes people's, you know, like what you might say is enthusiasm to get treatment, especially when people have acquired it again. So there are, you know, people we've spoken to who had Hep C a couple of times and sort of spoke at length about, you know, when I got it again, I just really felt I'd let myself down. I felt really bad about myself. You know, should I even go bother? Will they let me get it again? And I think these are all stigma effects. Yeah, and I mean, the thing about self-stigma as well, it's like, it's so hard to kind of separate it from just societal stigma. So it's like, it comes from the self, but all of those views and self, you know, are sort of made together with all the broader kind of discriminatory attitudes and stuff. So yeah, but it's a really powerful thing, I think, shaping treatment uptake too. Yeah. Great.
Well, thanks again.
Thanks.